Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind by Thomas Oden. Appendix: The Challenges of Early African Research. What I have attempted to do in this small book set forth the basic vision for a renewed initiative in the theological and historical reassessment of early African Christianity. I have done this in response to a request by the Early African Christianity Project that might draw the project toward a consensus on this vision. My remaining purpose in this appendix is to describe the specific plan for that research. An international consortium of schools and scholars is being gathered for the purpose of enabling and encouraging this research. It welcomes cooperation among world partners. It will seek to deepen the biblical and early African historical roots of contemporary African theology. 3 aims of future research. The Early African Christianity Consortium of Schools and Scholars has 3 aims. First, to translate and distribute key texts of early African Christian teaching in a cost-effective way, both digitally and through printed publications, to global Christians interested in early Christianity. Second, to accomplish this first goal, we need to enlist an international team of translators, linguists, historians, and information technology specialists. We are working to engender a network of leaders in African universities and seminaries who wish to pursue these texts and tasks. Third, by these means we hope to bring contemporary African theological reasoning to a deeper level of awareness of its own rich tradition of patristic sources written on African soil, shaped by and shaping many African cultures for more than a millennium, and whose influence continues on today. The precedent. These are our purposes. The nonprofit sponsor of this consortium is the Center for Early African Christianity, whose editorial offices are in Madison, New Jersey. It is a continuation of the work of the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture. This work already has an active worldwide team of over 400 translators, theologians, historians, and scholars who have been laboring for over a decade to translate and edit patristic texts that appear in the 29 volumes of the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture. This patristic commentary on the whole of canonical Scripture is being translated from its original languages, Greek, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, into Arabic, Chinese, Russian, Korean, Italian, and Spanish. A large percentage of these comments on Scripture are extracted from African sources. Thus, there is already available a massive amount of material from early African exegesis. To these, we will add other Christian texts and sources from Africa in the first millennium. The Theological Commission of the World Evangelical Alliance, WEA, meeting in Nairobi, Kenya in September 2006, has warmly approved this proposal as an officially sanctioned project of the WEA. This gives the consortium a splendid built-in network of links with all of the 52 national evangelical alliances in all parts of Africa. The regional and local African evangelical alliances connected with the WEA will be our natural partners for developing this network. The works of early African Christian writers will be made available in digital form, giving scholars the ability to make digital searches of key words and text, subjects, and authors. Scholars who have requisite historical and language competencies will be invited to participate in this project of translation, dissemination, publication, and study of the text and wisdom of early African Christianity. The consortium hopes to bring together several essential international networks of scholars and leaders to encourage increasing portions of the work to be accomplished on the African continent. One of these is the InterVarsity International Network of Ministries, especially as it appears throughout Africa. The second is the Lausanne International Network of Ministries. The third is the World Evangelical Alliance and its regional expression in the Association of Evangelicals in Africa. These are overlapping but very important and extensive networks of faith and friendship. From this core of associations, the consortium will work to build an international scholarly study and teaching initiative, supported by a web network. It will serve as a clearinghouse for a single common focus of interest: the study and distribution of text and multimedia narratives of early African Christianity and their significance for Africa today. This group will include not only evangelical scholars, but also Catholic, Coptic, Orthodox, Pentecostal, and Charismatic scholars and leaders. The intent is to publish text and tell stories of African Christian classics in a low-cost, reader-friendly format, many of them for small group use by both lay and clerical readers in the villages and cities of Africa. We will select texts that have historical significance or that pertain to or illuminate contemporary African cultural issues. Some will be made available in digital form for free web printable access, while others will be on printed pages. The core of this network will be centered in the editorial offices of the Early African Christianity Project. It will correlate digital and print publishing efforts among scholars, translators, reviewers, and publishers to accomplish the three purposes identified earlier. The antecedent research organizations, Institute of Classical Christian Studies and Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture, have been studying African theology for many years and are aware of the range of problems awaiting attention in Africa. The scope. The Early African Christianity Project will limit its publications to African sources, focusing on text written on the African continent before 1000 CE. It will include studies that demonstrate the influence of these texts and ideas on the early formation of Europe and world Christianity. It is a firm conviction of many in this project, though yet to be fully argued and established, that many ideas moved from Africa to Europe in their earliest centuries of the formation of Christianity. This is seen in the monastic movement and the conciliar movement, in exegesis, in triune teaching, in penitential practice, in universal history, and in liturgy, law, literature, and ethics. The central hypothesis yet to be fully explored and defended: African Christianity has an intellectual history equal to or unexcelled by either Europe or Asia before the mid-4th century. By the time of Basil and Jerome, the East and West had already learned its most important lessons from Africa. This is not to deny the worldwide frame of reference or Catholicity of early African Christianity. Its greatest texts and exponents were strongly informed by the ecumenical rule of faith, which Tertullian and Origen found embedded in the apostolic tradition itself, which is shared with all believers worldwide and to which the Fathers at Nicaea appealed. Early African doctrinal definitions sought to reflect not just the faith held by Africans, but by all Christians the world over. African leaders such as Athanasius and Cyprian argued it with such exceptional clarity and intellectual power that their formulas were recalled and replicated by many centuries of ecumenical formulations and gained consensus in Asia and Europe. This is evident in the development of triune language, Christological definitions, penitential teaching, social thought, and especially scriptural exegesis. This the consortium will demonstrate in due course on the basis of historical, textual, and archaeological evidence and argument. The African Center of the International Consortium. Young African scholars are proving well fitted to make plausible these points of historical argumentation and evidentiary presentation. African communities of faith have sustained persuasive forms of reasoning for more than 2 millennia of Christianity community life and long before the inception of modern Western ideologies. These are distinctly African contributions that are awaiting recognition by African and world scholars, though lying largely buried now in the 2nd through 7th centuries of African history, archaeology, and literary text. These texts require not only African scholarly examination, but also African intellectual critique in the light of recent centuries of African historical experience. Even the best early African writers have limitations that can be further illuminated by attentiveness to currently developing African history. This is a scholarly project seeking to resource global Christian scholars about African Christianity and African scholars about early African Christianity. Africa has a story to tell the world church. Africa has been touched by the Hebrew Christian history of salvation since the times of Isaiah and Jeremiah. This is a story to which the whole of global Christianity may rightly claim ownership. Many are ready to hear it rightly told. This consortium has no hidden purposes other than to make African Christianity strong in intellectual leadership. The consortium has no Western advocacy interest, exactly the opposite, African advocacy, within global Christianity. The underlying conviction is that ancient African Christians had more realistic and promising ideas for global Christianity than many modern Westerners. For these reasons, it is evident that the active center of the international consortium must ultimately reside in the continent of Africa, even if startup initiatives may be proportionally borne by others. The Consortium of Scholars. This consortium emerges out of and stands in continuity with preceding projects of the Institute for Classical Christian Studies, ICCS, whose editorial team has produced the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture, ACCS, and its 3 succeeding projects, the 5-volume Ancient Christian Doctrine series, ACD, scheduled for 2009, the Ancient Christian Text series, ACT, currently 12 volumes being prepared, and the series of volumes titled Ancient Christian Devotional, all published by InterVarsity Press. In all these preceding projects, the editors, translators, and a vast number of international cooperators have worked steadily over a decade with the key African exegetical sources. These include major African figures such as Origen, Athanasius, Clement, Augustine, Tertullian, Cyprian, Optatus, Lactantius, Marius Victorinus, and Primatius. There are already myriad references in the ACCS to these African writers as a textual base already in place and already being digitalized. There will be a select group of academic centers in Africa that will serve as host locations for the early African Christianity Consortium. Resources for this project will flow into and out of these centers. The consortium will then become the seedbed of a worldwide network of scholars and educational programs focused on early African Christianity, linked together through a website without the constant need for extensive travel and conference planning. The primary African audience for this project will be the evangelical or Orthodox and Catholic faith communities of Africa. The term we are coming to use to describe all of these communities and traditions is Orthodox African Christianity. This project focuses on particular texts, however, rather than particular institutions. It features the text of classical Christian teaching in Africa. assembling the pieces of the puzzle. In a poignant moment of admonition, the consortium planners have been urged that they need not take upon themselves the entire burden of producing a core of literature on early African Christianity as they had once imagined. Rather, they could conceive of it in a more modest way, to invite others to pursue a constellation of problems that need to be carefully conceived, researched, answered, and made available both through digital and print media. Even this chastened version is a formidable project. Its requirements will be strenuous. The need for rigorous historical study, accurate communication of findings, scholarly integrity, and exegetical thoroughness will be very demanding. The standards must be set high for candor, empathy, diplomacy, and sensitive cross-cultural communication between Christian scholars in Africa and their international counterparts. It will call African scholars to take seriously the African text of the early Christian tradition, and it will require our already intact global team of patristic translators and experts to take seriously the special challenge of Africa today. No aspect of this endeavor will be an easy task. It will require a consortium made up of not only qualified scholars and linguists, but also a coordinated and balanced team of ecumenical traditions and diverse academic institutions. The consortium is working to fit together these four essential pieces of the feasibility puzzle: academic leadership, website technology, print publishing interest, and resource development. Academic leadership. The first task is to draw together academic leadership from the best current scholarship of Protestant, Coptic, Orthodox, and Catholic theologians of Christianity on the continent of Africa, and the best worldwide expertise from patristic experts familiar with the text, archaeology, theology, and history of the Church of Africa from the 1st to the 10th centuries, wherever they may reside. This research effort seeks to engender indigenous theological leadership in Africa. Its goal is to make young African Christians aware of their own early African sources. It is likely to stumble if it presents a public face of being essentially another form of colonial imposition of Euro-American ideas intruding on Africans without their consent or respect for their dignity. This effort will involve international consultations on key themes, figures, ideas, and events of early African Christianity. This project must mature from good seed and good soil. The soil is Africa. The seed is the early African theologians, the brilliant writers, thinkers, homilists, and leaders of the first millennium of Christianity in Africa. This does not rule out the importance of Euro-American patristic and theological scholars having an active role, but it places the focus where it must be in this case, on African voices, ancient and modern. We seek to hear African voices from the earliest Christian times in Africa that have the capacity to awaken present-day African hearts and minds to the text. We seek to translate in terms that can be heard in the current languages of both African academic and popular cultures, English, French, Arabic, and major vernacular and regional languages. The task is not to convince international patristic scholars to awaken motivations among African theologians. Rather, we hope for grace to be modest servants of the wisest text of early African Christianity. The aim is that the authenticity of those texts and sources will become completely evident to an emerging generation of young scholars on the African continent. Maximizing digital technologies. The second piece of the puzzle is to ask how the consortium may use digital technologies in a cost-effective way so as to avoid some of the high cost and economic obstacles of print publishing. The more we contemplated this project, the more we were convinced that the larger proportion of it must be devoted to accessible and inexpensive digital technology. This means a well-tended website driven by links to many other digital sites. Our website and networking media will prompt links through multiple sources such as professors, booksellers, academic societies, service ministries, and international conferences. To this end, we have created and reserved a simple and descriptive domain name, earlyafricanchristianity.com. This cyber location will be the digital home of the consortium. We hope to build up a highly effective website aimed at an international network of scholars and non-professionals who happen to be interested in early African Christianity. The website will aim to have 100,000 hits the first year of operation. When anyone on the web wants to know about African Christianity, their attention will be called to this website. The website is not just an ancillary addition to the project. It will be at the very core of the project and the initiator of numerous subsidiary efforts, projects, groups, meetings, consultations, seminars, and forms of information distribution. The website will feature a running online commentary for anyone worldwide who wants to be involved in examining vital issues of classic Orthodox African Christian teachings and their personal and societal implications. This will require the nuanced integration of diverse digital resources, coordinated with sophisticated ways of presenting the project's ideas and text on the web, which will include correlated projects in Africa, African Christianity, and patristic studies, and comments from distant correspondents. There has been a vacuum in the virtual world of web communication that this project fills. The first level of energy and support will be dedicated to this digital project rather than to costly and complicated face-to-face international consultations. Publishing outcomes. The print publishing that will emerge out of this project over the course of time will be engendered through the dialogue and the resources and ideas and approaches that are stimulated through the ongoing research and the visitors to this website. We will develop out of these efforts a low-cost print publication program designed primarily for Africa. It will be relatively smaller than the digital program because it will be far more cost-effective to make information available on the web at minuscule cost. From the website, we will select the ideas, articles, and essays that peer reviewers agree need to be edited, printed, distributed, and placed in libraries and in the hands of teachers, laity, and scholars all over Africa, as well as for the use of global Christians interested in Africa. The publications wing of this research is charged with gathering the gleanings, the most viable contributions and efforts of the interactions, conferences, consultations, and seminars that emerge out of the consortium. The most promising manuscripts will be considered for the more expensive and labor-intensive task of popular print publishing for primarily an African non-professional audience. This will require seeking, nurturing, and distributing to a culturally diverse African audience. It will require the supplementation of African publishing costs, printing, and distribution. It will reach out to the millions of Copts in Egypt and those in Ethiopia and the huge numbers of Roman Catholics on the continent, along with the millions of hard-to-classify participants in African independent churches, as well as the Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, Reformed, Baptist, and Pentecostal congregations all over Africa, plus various charismatic and healing movements. All of these worshiping communities have one thing in common, yet insufficiently unrecognized: the patrimony and wisdom of ancient African Christianity. They have friends and ancestors and antecedents in the first millennium of African intellectual history and exegesis. This ecumenical audience has not yet been adequately reached by present publishing and distribution systems. The international network of the intervarsity community worldwide has shown imaginative genius in developing and distributing the international translations of the ancient Christian commentary on Scripture. This same energy will be applied to early African Christianity. The needed effort is not to get everything published on the web into print, but rather to get very wide distribution to a worldwide and especially an African audience first through the web, and then to select carefully the studies, texts, and projects that deserve and require print publication. The focus will be on short books, inexpensive print format that can be purchased by village and urban Africans who cannot easily pay Euro-American pricing. The prevailing premise here is that the younger African ecumenical audiences are soon going to have much more access to the digital web sources, but in addition to these, they will need well-selected printed text for purposes of background reading, class discussion materials, lay devotionals, study group, and homiletic and theological teaching purposes. Distribution systems will need to be modestly subsidized to help drive down costs for hard-pressed African laity and students who cannot travel extensively, but increasingly will be exercising computer skills in an international environment. Readability in local and traditional languages is a long-range goal of the publication effort. The products must be edited and presented in a way that is engaging for lay Christians in Africa. They must be understandable to young persons within wide varieties of Christian communions. We hope to keep a list of classic titles available in early African Christianity for a global Christian audience. The project is not intended primarily for a small elite group of university scholars or sociological experts. It is unapologetically for the well-being of global Christianity. The resulting publications will be aimed for use by Coptic, Catholic, and Protestant lay readers all over Africa, as well as worldwide readers interested in early African Christianity. The African audience alone is enormous, potentially nearing 500 million souls. To define the target audience as university scholars would limit it to a few thousand. Instead, our purpose is to become a modest instrument of the Spirit in engendering, edifying, and nurturing African Christian communities who are reading not only in French or English or Portuguese, but also in Arabic and in some of the vernacular languages such as Swahili and Zulu. They have a right to encounter the dazzling intellectual wellsprings and courageous history of early African Christianity in their own mother tongue. There is good reason to constrain the temptation to turn this scholarly ecumenical effort into a political or ideological program, or to let it become captive to any form of narrow nationalism or political or economic ideology, whether of the left or right. We leave it to the Spirit to inspire lay people to find ways of making applicable to their vocations and political orders what the early African Christian texts and sources have to say to the contemporary crises and hopes of Africa. There are no plans for bureaucracy maintenance. Most of the work will be done by part-time, contracted, fee-based or incentive models, or productivity-based agreements. There is no expenditure proposed on bricks and mortar. It will largely be accomplished by voluntary commitment of time by scholars and cooperators who truly believe in the importance of the project. None are likely to be deeply engaged in this project if they do not feel inwardly called and guided to it by a strong sense of vocation. The successful accomplishment of the early African Christianity project ultimately looks toward the completion of 9 feasible objectives. 1. A multi-volume encyclopedia of early African Christianity topically organized. 2. A multi-volume history of early African Christianity chronologically organized. 3. An interdisciplinary journal of African Christianity for both historical and contemporary questions. 4. This would be correlated with a study section in early African Christianity at major scholarly societies. 5. A working daily maintained website on early Christianity. 6. A multidisciplinary program of studies at some appropriate academic institution on African Christianity, ancient and modern. 7. An intentional and determined proactive effort to inculcate the values of classical Christian teaching grounded in early African texts. 8. An attempt to correlate this scholarly effort with corresponding parachurch ministries. And 9. Special attention to the needs of Christians and Muslims in reconciling dialogue. Conclusion. There are many urgent themes interwoven here. The relation between Christianity and Islam, between Europe and Africa, between global and regional Christianity, between religion and life, between sacred text and contemporary dilemmas. All of these flow in and out of a single lucid prism, early African Christianity. The ancient Christians who wrote the pertinent text to allow us to understand this story were wise and gentle, and some were true saints who had an unexcelled grasp of the Christian life and of human history. Early African Christianity has added incalculable value to the Western intellectual tradition. The study of early African Christianity does not resolve all the problems of modern African Christianity today, but it goes a long way toward overcoming the vague sense that African Christianity has to depend largely on oral tradition alone for what is truly African in its Christian identity. It adds value to African religious communities by helping to restore the confidence of Africans in their own early African intellectual tradition. End of the appendix. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below.